Heather Stambaugh is a high school teacher in rural Ohio, a place where every day, in the chalk dusted halls and quiet classrooms, the impact of federal funding is felt in ways that many never consider. As I walk with Heather through the corridors of her modest school, her voice rings clear with purpose. Every day, I see what federal funding can do, she says, pausing at a classroom door where students, each with unique challenges and dreams, are hard at work. For Heather, these funds are not just numbers on a ledger or distant political jargon. They represent the very tools that light up the aha moments. Those times when a struggling student finally grasps a difficult concept, when futures are quietly reshaped. In her classroom, federal dollars mean the availability of individual aides who work one on one with students who have high needs. It means opening up the opportunities for small group sessions where students are given the attention they desperately need. Heather explains that we are preparing the next generation of leaders, even if they are not yet doctors, lawyers, or business executives. They have enormous potential, she says softly, but without enough staff and the necessary tools, they risk being left behind. The weight of her words is unmistakable. It is in these wells of support, provided by federal funding, that individual students experience those transformative moments. A struggling reader finally decoding a perplexing passage, a student with disabilities gaining the extra help needed to understand a math problem, or a quiet voice emerging during a small group session where they feel seen and valued. For Heather, each dollar spent has a human cost or benefit. Federal funds subsidize the salaries of dedicated tutors, pay for personalized aids, enable intervention specialists to work tirelessly with students who lag behind grade level, and even cover after-school programs that provide lifelines for those in need. In Ohio, where such support can determine whether a child reaches their potential or fades further into academic obscurity, every penny matters. When federal initiatives such as Title I funding and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, support these programs, they do more than simply add resources. They sow the seeds of opportunity. In one poignant conversation, Heather recalled a moment when a student, long considered at risk of falling behind, finally transformed his perspective. The one-on-one session with a dedicated aide, funded by the federal grants, had him exclaim with the delight of realization, a real light bulb moment that redefined his day and perhaps even his future. Yet, as Heather and her colleagues fight to keep these critical programs robust, the specter of policy change looms large. Political discussions about the future of the Department of Education are far from academic debates in Washington. They are decisions that ripple into classrooms and affect vulnerable students. Recently, proposals have emerged from high-level political figures, notably from the administration of President Donald Trump and several Republican lawmakers, who have expressed the desire to dismantle the federal department that oversees education. In their view, shifting responsibilities back to the states through block grants could streamline the process and potentially replace federal support with state-run initiatives. However, to educators like Heather, the implications of stripping away these supports are immediate and stark. Imagine, she warns, a world where second and third graders no longer get specific reading interventions, where a student already reading well below grade level in high school would receive even less individualized help. I worry, she confides, about a future where these students might not have the fundamental skills necessary to navigate the basic tasks of life. How will they read a medical document, sign a contract, or even keep up in an increasingly competitive world? The concern is not hypothetical. In communities like rural Ohio, where resources are already stretched thin, federal funding is often the linchpin without which students could easily slip further behind their peers. Across the country, similar stories echo in different tones. Take, for instance, the experience of Rodney Fresh, a high school teacher in Detroit. In a city where nearly 84% of kids are eligible for free or reduced price lunch, schools have evolved to become more than just centers of learning. They are sanctuaries offering meals, counseling, and comprehensive support services. Fresh has witnessed firsthand how federal funding has transformed lives. He recalls students who, in a different system, might have been dismissed as throwaway children by society. Through the support of career and technical programs funded by federal dollars, these young individuals were given a purpose and the training necessary to excel and find their niche. These aren't just academic lessons, Fresh explains in his measured tone. For some, school becomes the place where they discover their path, from learning trade skills to even becoming a future entrepreneur. His words reinforce that federal funding, while seemingly bureaucratic, is the scaffolding on which many students' futures are built. The Federal Department of Education, which was established in 1980 by Congress, serves as the administrative home for these funds and initiatives. It collects data, directs supportive funds to schools, and enforces civil rights anti-discrimination laws that ensure education is accessible to all. Despite being the smallest cabinet-level department, with fewer than 5,000 employees, its role is disproportionately significant, especially in communities with high poverty levels and a large population of students with disabilities. Across states, the percentage of school revenue coming from federal dollars varies dramatically. While nationwide federal funding accounts for around 11% of school revenues, in states like South Dakota, Mississippi, and Montana, it accounts for nearly 20%. These are states where such monies are not merely supplemental. They are, in fact, critical to maintaining educational services for those who need them most. In schools funded by these programs, intervention specialists work to pull students up to grade level. Tutors conduct sessions designed to sharpen reading and math skills essential for academic success. For many students, these supports are not ordinary classroom extras, but lifelines that level the playing field. Heather has seen it firsthand. She observes children with disabilities participating more actively because they receive individualized attention, and she witnesses those with learning difficulties finally catching up with their peers. Federal dollars pay for more than just classroom aids. They pay for hope, for determination, and for the belief that every student deserves a fair chance at life. Yet this very system is now under threat. President Trump, along with some Republican lawmakers, has publicly stated that it might be time to send all education-related work back to the states, back to local boards of education and state agencies. The argument presented is that those on the ground are better equipped to understand local needs than a central federal authority. Representative Johanna Hayes, a Democrat on the House Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Elementary, and Secondary Education, counters that argument. She emphasizes that many of the decisions concerning curriculum, instructional materials, and even classroom teaching are already determined locally. Federal funding exists to support these local decisions, providing additional layers of support where needed. However, if the funding that underwrites these supports were to be stripped away, local boards might find themselves ill-prepared to fill the gap, especially in schools already grappling with limited resources. In legislative halls, voices like U.S. Senator Mike Rounds have spoken about dismantling the Federal Department of Education, arguing that the department has never educated a single student. His proposed solutions involve redirecting funds and program enforcement to other federal departments: Interior, Treasury, Health and Human Services, Labor, and State. But such redirection poses a serious risk. The programs that teachers like Heather count on, Title I, IDEA, after-school tutoring, individual student aids, could be diminished or altered in ways that leave the most vulnerable students without adequate support. For students who rely on these programs day in and day out, any cuts or redirections could mean a significant setback in their educational journey. It could mean a widening of the achievement gap that has long plagued underfunded school districts, where even minor shifts in resources have outsized effects. Now, let's consider the broader picture. Federal funding has always been more than just a transactional relationship between the government and schools. It is an agreement, a promise that every child, regardless of their background or where they live, deserves the chance to succeed. In states like Ohio, where the cost of education is high and the challenges of rural schooling are compounded by limited local resources, federal support provides a foundation for growth. It ensures that what might seem like a minor intervention, a few extra hours of one-on-one tutoring or the introduction of a dedicated reading specialist can create lasting change in the lives of students who might otherwise face a future of limited opportunities. Take a moment to imagine a classroom without these crucial supports. Picture a high school where teachers are forced to juggle larger classes, where students who need extra help are lost in the shuffle, and where the promise of a light bulb moment is a rarity rather than a frequent occurrence. That is the harsh reality that many educators fear if federal funding tears away at the structures already in place. It's not simply a budgetary issue, it's a question of equity, of fairness, of ensuring that every child is given an opportunity to flourish regardless of where they are born. The debate isn't solely about numbers or political ideologies. It's about the real human impact, about teachers like Heather and Rodney who show up every day with a passion to inspire and a commitment to making a difference. It's about students whose lives are enriched by that extra bit of attention, who find confidence in knowing that someone is willing to invest in their success. Federal funding might seem like abstract policy to some, but for those in the classroom, it is as tangible as the textbooks, the whiteboards, and the desks lined up in neat rows. There are layers of complexity to this debate. On one hand, the argument for decentralizing education and returning power to local boards is rooted in a desire for accountability and flexibility. On the other hand, many fear that without the federal safeguard, disparities will only grow wider, especially in communities where local resources are already scarce. Schools in affluent districts may find innovative ways to fill the gap, but in more modest or rural settings, the withdrawal of federal funds could prove catastrophic. For example, consider a small school in rural Ohio where every dollar from federal funding goes directly toward vital services. The extra reading interventions for early graders aren't a luxury, they're a necessity. For a high school student reading below grade level, that extra intervention might mean the difference between a future in college or being trapped in a cycle of academic failure. Heather's daily routine is a testament to that delicate balance. Early in the morning, as she reviews lesson plans and organizes materials, she is mindful of the fact that every program funded by the federal dollars has a direct impact on a student's life. There are stories of students who might have been written off as lost causes who find renewed hope because of the interventions that allow them to catch up with their peers. This is not a battle fought solely in classrooms or in the corridors of Congress. It's a struggle that reflects the values we place on education and on the future of our society. When funding is secured, there is not only a transfer of money, it is an investment in the human capital of tomorrow. Federal funding helps ensure that schools have the flexibility to hire the aides and specialists needed to address the diverse learning needs of students. It provides the means to run after-school programs that nurture creativity and skill building, programs where students, away from distractions, can focus on catching up or even getting ahead. Ironically, as legislators debate if federal oversight is necessary for local curriculum decisions, the critical support functions, ranging from specialized aids to comprehensive tutoring programs, remain deeply dependent on federal dollars. Federal initiatives like Title I and IDEA were born out of a recognition that not all communities are equal, that some children require a bit more help just to keep pace with their peers. In Ohio, as in many other states, these programs have proven indispensable, quietly working to level an uneven playing field. They are the lifelines, ensuring that the most vulnerable students get the chance to build skills essential for life beyond school, skills that go far beyond reading, writing, and arithmetic. Imagine the long-term effects if these programs were to be cut. The next generation of doctors, lawyers, business executives, and community leaders might grow up without the foundation of support that many of us take for granted. Heather's voice carries a blend of optimism and concern. Optimism for the potential in her students and concern for the looming fiscal changes that could jeopardize the gains made over decades. Her experience is echoed in communities from Detroit to rural Ohio, and even as conversations continue in Washington, the clock is ticking for millions of students whose academic and personal development hinges on the support provided by federal funding. In the end, what this debate illustrates is that education is not simply about imparting knowledge. It is about providing each individual with the opportunity to thrive in every aspect of life. Federal funding ensures that schools can offer gateways to success, not just through textbooks and lectures, but through personalized support that instills confidence and lays the groundwork for lifelong learning. For teachers like Heather Stambaugh and Rodney Fresh, every intervention, every extra hour spent on a struggling student is a reaffirmation of the belief that education is the great equalizer. It is a belief built on countless light bulb moments that transform uncertainty into potential and confusion into clarity. Whether it's a second grader gaining the reading skills needed to tackle more advanced concepts or a high schooler discovering that the future is not predetermined by past struggles, these moments are the undeniable proof that investment in education yields dividends that ripple out into every corner of society. As discussions about the future of federal funding continue in political arenas, one thing remains clear. Without adequate resources, the brightest minds may falter before they even have the chance to shine. The funding that appears as just a fraction of school revenue on paper turns out to be the fabric that holds the promise of education together for those who need it most. And as Heather looks at her students every day with hope, determination, and an unyielding commitment to their growth, her message is unmistakable. Federal funding is not merely a policy. It is the very lifeblood of classrooms where the future is being shaped minute by minute. In a world where education must serve as the bridge from potential to achievement, we owe it to our children to preserve these essential supports. The conversation is not about ideology or budget lines. It is about ensuring that every student, whether in rural Ohio, Detroit, or any other corner of the nation, can access the specialized help, the individualized attention, and the nurturing environment they need to succeed. Because in the end, to invest in education is to invest in our future, a future built on the promise and potential of every child who walks into a classroom ready to light up the next light bulb moment. Heather Stambaugh's story, and those of teachers like her across the country, remind us that the true measure of our society is not found in the wealth of our institutions, but in the strength of our commitment to the next generation. As debates rage on in political circles, and as voices call for drastic measures like dismantling the Department of Education, the real impact is felt in schools, where every student's success is the true barometer of progress. And so, the call to protect and expand federal funding becomes not just a political issue, but a moral imperative, one that determines whether today's children will grow up to become the innovators, leaders, and compassionate citizens of tomorrow. This is not just a story about budgets or